now we have the Free Press's own Peter Savodnik. We love you, Peter. Thank you so much for being here. Your story is out today, and it's about two towns that you say symbolize a broken America. You have Flint, Michigan, and then East Palestine, Ohio. And we have some pictures we'll put up on the screen. The women are in East Palestine, and that is an abandoned middle school in Flint. Peter, I was reading your piece coming into the city on the subway this morning, and it really broke my heart. It was so incredible how you put these two stories side by side in a way that now seems so obvious, but nobody had thought to do before. Walk us through the significance and, the kind of racial class story that you're telling here that I think is not obvious to everybody.
Thanks, Batya. It's been 10 years since the start of the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, almost 2 years since the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. We're just a few days from this election, and both these places have come to represent these very powerful forces in American politics. Systemic racism, which is talked about endlessly on the left, and the plight of the white working class, which fueled Donald Trump's rise to power on the right. And I was really interested in looking at how these two forces or ideas really weave together and how they amount to, in many cases, two sides of the same proverbial coin.
Peter, on Flint, just to kind of set the table here, I was going back to this when reading your piece. Can you just give us a sense of, you say it's been 10 years, and I can't believe it's been that long. And I was like, good Lord, I remember when this story came out. What about that story 10 years hence was true and what wasn't? I mean, because it became such a potent political issue, and particularly when it was viewed through the prism, as you point out, of race and of sort of environmental discrimination, which was a term that was used quite a bit. When you look back at this, is like, at the end, was the general idea that we had about actually true? Was that like largely true?
Yeah, that's in many ways the question. So I think that what happened is that a lot of powerful, mostly Democrats, starting with Hillary Clinton, turned this into a matter of race. They swooped into Flint, and they highlighted the fact that Flint is now about 60% Black, and it became a matter of sort of the structural racism that had led to the poverty there and to the kind of lead in the pipes there. And I think that what that obscures is the fact that the very long, sad story prior to the water crisis is actually what leads to the water crisis. It's the decline of the auto industry. It's the story told by Michael Moore. It's the story of what has happened to countless towns, hamlets, across the American hinterland. And so I think, was race a part of this conversation? I think probably, yeah. Like there's no doubt about that. And when you talk to people there, you can sense a sort of like this. There's a palpable anger about sort of like why it took a year and a half, for example, for the government to react to what amounted to brown water that they were showing up at city council meetings with. Why was it so hard to get people to do things? But I think that, so yes, there is this question of race, but beneath that is this much bigger, deeper story of decline and economic deterioration that has made Flint, like East Palestine, forgettable in a very sad and awful way.
I mean, but isn't the subtext I'm getting, and maybe I'm imposing my own biases here, but is that, it turns out the story of East Palestine sort of disproves the racial narrative, right? I mean, it sort of gives us this lens that, if the majority of the residents of Flint had been poor whites, they would probably also have been ignored. I mean, isn't that sort of the lesson that we're learning now, and, as the wheel turns, and also, what would help the people of East Palestine and the people of Flint is obviously the same thing, right? I mean, a kind of a class-based politics that started treating poor people and working class people like they weren't garbage, would help both of those communities, no?
Yeah, buddy, I think that's correct. I think that East Palestine does illustrate or make clear that this is really not about race. This was not about race in Flint. It's not about race in East Palestine. But I also think it illustrates something which is more troubling, which is that uh, it does not matter how much a president, a candidate, a party runs on the sort of the cause of, sort of this or that disenfranchised group. We're talking about really, really big, deep structural issues, economic issues, these tectonic forces over which Washington, the parties, any one president have almost zero power. And so what they can't say, what Donald Trump can't say, what Barack Obama can't say, what no one can say is there's actually not much we can do to help you until you start making something that the rest of the world wants to buy. And that's I think the very sad sort of place that Flint and East Palestine find themselves in now, whereas they were once, the very, very important parts of these national or global economies. They're now cut off from them.
Can I just push back on that just very briefly? I mean, so what would be your explanation for why the people of East Palestine love Trump and feel very much that he is committed to improving their lots, whereas I haven't been to Flint recently, but I can imagine that there's probably not a lot of enthusiasm there for President Obama at this point.
Actually, no. So the same kind of tribalism persists in both places. In Flint, they love Harris. For the most part, outside of Flint, they not so much. But in Flint, there's a lot of support for Harris. In East Palestine, there's a lot of support for Trump. And I think that like there's a certain political inertia. There's a certain kind of tribal impulse, a racial, cultural impulse. Both groups are sort of drawn to their respective candidates because of certain cultural, political affinities. And both those candidates know how to speak to those audiences and get them excited or make them feel remembered. But the reality is that what the Trump administration shows, I think, is it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of really dedicated, thoughtful people in the White House who care a lot about the plight of the white working class or the working class or whatever. That's very nice. That's good. But these problems are much, much deeper than that. And they're not going to be solved in the course of a quarter or a year or a few years. This is about something that's going to happen over a matter of, decades or generations.
Peter, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, it's a great piece. I mean, this is the reminded me reading this of FDR talking in 1932 about the forgotten man. This is Peter's forgotten man piece. And I was going to ask you at the end about the political ramifications of this, and you just depressed me. It's like, yeah, no one can fix it. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for telling us nothing can be done.